appreciate the efforts of the AU, of ECOWAS, and others in security, economy, politically. Nkrumah was a visionary, no doubt about it. And it has been said and confirmed that he lived, many years beyond, his generation. Mm-hmm. But again, let me repeat that I think each and every one of us, particularly as Ghanaians, ought, to also see what we can contribute. It's not just about the leadership on the continent. It's in our own small ways. What is it that we can do? Inshira with a mic, can, do more, than most, leaders. And when I talk about leaders, managers, and others, in our reviews and in our... So let us see, this as a challenge for us in Ghana. Today is a very important, day. And I think that the various things that are being done, including, your part in even sharing, some of the things he said, which are very, real, today should inspire us, as Ghanaians. Nkrumah was a Ghanaian, but above all, a Pan-Africanist. And I think that's the way we have to see, and work, towards, achieving national and continental objectives.
Okay. A lot of the time when we talk about the economy, people tend to think that it is a very, it's a distance away from them. But everything that you do, it's a very sensitive position you hold in government. Essentially, decisions you take affect whether I get a pay increase, albeit that it is not direct. The things that you do, the policies you put in place could affect whether some people are still in a job or families are happy and things like that. So this morning, we're going to have a conversation that really is about the economy, but also affects our listeners, whether they are housewives or men and women who work in the market or in offices or wherever they found themselves. I'd like to quote some numbers, and this is the boring part of economics. Now, Ghana's record high GDP growth of 14% in 2011 was something that put us right up there with the fastest growing economies. Now, you fast forward to 2014, we were hovering around 4.1. There has been a consistent slide in our GDP from 2011 to date. And at the moment, I think the target is 4.1. Whether we're able to achieve that or not will depend on how the last 3 months of this year go. How did we get here? From 14% in 2011, and then we're targeting 4.1 in 2016.
Well, thank you very much. I think your question makes it important to put things in context, both domestic and internationally, when you talk about economics. And I agree with you that, so that we need to reduce the language, and I hope that is what, we can do.
Wonderful.
This morning, because when you talk about the economy, there are three major players in the economy. Households, who generate income, pay taxes, and spend. And they play a very vital role, in the economy. Then you have businesses, who from banks that mobilize the resources from households and from other businesses and channel it back into the economy for, production. You have Joy FM Studio, being part of the service economy. I say this because the services sector of the economy has been growing. Often we don't associate it with the work we do. Communications, is one major expansion in the economy. We have transport and others, and we can come back to it. And then you have government, which, takes basically taxes, spends, and sometimes borrows because it has a wherewithal, collective wherewithal to be able to borrow, particularly for infrastructure and for social intervention, in order that we can have, growth, in order that we can have inclusive. Growth must be inclusive, very important, we can explain some of these things. So I think in looking at the economy, there's a tendency to look at the economy, particularly politically, in terms of the government in power, in terms of ministers. No. We are all, players in the economy. And sometimes I wonder where, for example, you have the head of an institution or a major player in an institution, be it our hospitals, be it our schools, and I'm talking about the government, sector in particular, referring to the government as though it were distant when we talk about the economy, but failing to realize that in terms of the management of the economy, we have taken taxes and we have allocated it for running hospitals, for running schools. And therefore, as far as the implementation is concerned, we are all part of, that process. But to your question, the first factor, the 14% was recorded at the end of, 2011 going into 2012. That's one major factor. We became, modest as it is, started exporting crude oil. That was a single phenomenon. That occurred. Prior to that, we had gone through the rebasing, to show that the structure of the economy is different from what it was. I just mentioned services, banking, from banking to telecommunications to, we got entered into the information. Ghana was one of the major beneficiaries of expansion, in the services sector, partly due to its location, but also partly due to, policies, particularly being seen as a very, liberal environment, with peaceful environment, which is why it's important that we protect these things.
Just before you go on, can you help us understand what rebasing of the economy means?
Well, rebasing, let's start with the national output, everybody's contribution. Your contribution, as a presenter, my contribution, working in the Ministry of Finance, I spoke about the businessman. There's an attempt to quantify this, to put a value. And this is where the Ghana Statistical Service becomes important. So again, let me go to the household. What is the value of a household? It's daddy's salary, mommy's trading activities, maybe...
Or salary.
Yeah, salary. Salary, trading, what I'm taking a typical, household just to illustrate,
that's right.
Where the point I want to make. It may even include, the little activity, of the student who is innovative and buying and selling things. All this put together is a household's income. The same way, just as every member of the family's income, and some spend, children.
That's right.
They normally, are part of those who spend. They may not contribute, but now when you come to the economy, we take the household, which we take businesses. The value. What is the value of Joy FM? You can look at it in balance sheet terms. You can look at it in potential. You can look at it in various, ways. All of these are put together, and that is the national output: agriculture, services, industry, everything. That national output, when valued or quantified, is what we call the GDP.
That's right.
The gross national product. There's a net concept, but we don't want to go.
Yeah.
So let's look at it just in terms of valuing our output. Rebasing means, okay, so when you are calculating the GDP, you are looking, and I'm trying to simplify as much as possible. When you are calculating the GDP, you look at the contribution of agric. You look at the contribution, of retailers. You look at the contribution of services, banking, all of it. The methodology, maybe you can invite Ghana Statistical Service to come in, but they normally do surveys, and do other things. And they put a value on our output, and that's the gross domestic product. Now, you do this because it's a very intense exercise. In Ghana, until the rebasing was done, it was a long exercise, but culminating in 2010 when it was done. The base that was being used, I believe, was 1993. That was when a major comprehensive, when Ghana was basically an agrarian economy. some services were emerging, but you also saw downturn in transportation and others because that's was a difficult period for the economy if you go back. So you pause and you say rebasing is the basis, rebasis from the base, at the basis on which this computation is done, do they reflect the reality of the economy?
So in a nutshell, rebasing is...
Rebasing means you are taking services, for example, which didn't used to be dominant in 1993, but in 2000, it's very dominant and it's visible.
So a relook at the various weighting, the weighting that is given on all of these.
On the various, the weighting that is given to agric. So you move a bit of the weight, from a predominantly agric,
and then throw some into services, and if industry is picking up so that basically is what rebasing is. Okay.
So when we did that, we saw our GDP, grow by 60%.
That's right.
Approximately. Then, fast forward, we invested, private sector, and public, GMPC, others in the energy sector. So just as services was growing, oil and gas came on the scene, particularly, crude oil. And 2011, we started exporting crude. 2012 was the first full year of exporting crude. Now, again, so that is one of the major contributors. Again, we had seen over 10 years, gold, cocoa prices were on ascendancy. They were rising. As primary commodity exporters, those were also contributing to growth. Come 2012, and a number of things happened. Domestically first. So we reached a peak, the 14%. So you can see that the 14% came about from the economy itself transforming, transforming in terms of, as I said, services growing and other, but also factors, which are like the rebasing, which reflects that transformation, and then, the export of crude oil in particular. When we entered going in from in fact, we started seeing the symptoms from 2011. The irony is that just when these were happening and the growth, there were also symptoms that were telling us that things were getting wrong. But let's start, first of all, let me mention three or four of them. First, there was a serious disruption to the economy from the supply of gas. Again, integration. We're talking about whether Africa should be integrated. Much of the gas which replaced our hydro was coming from Nigeria. We all know that phenomenon. We don't have to, rehash, whole thing. But for 2.5 years, we saw a disruption in gas. This was an economy that had moved also from hydro and was using thermal. So there was a major disruption. We coined a word which has now gone into Wikipedia and other things, doom so. So that was a major challenge.
So that was one of the major issues that you think affected the
not that
decline.
I think it did.
That it did affect it.
It did affect because, sorry, let me just run through it quickly.
Okay.
So you had that disruption in power supply. I think that, we all know the complaints from industry, from businesses and others operating instead of 8 hours. We had to do a lot of, rationalization, and allocation of the little power that was available. We moved into emergency power to try, resolve it. The gold cocoa prices fell. Gold still remains in the tank. Cocoa has recovered somewhat after about a decade, of the run.
Yeah.
And then the latest was the crude oil, which contributed in terms of price and help us, particularly our export base, the value of the currency, the stability and everything crashed from about over 100, dollars per barrel. Today we're at, 45, 46. You may be lucky to even get 48, more than half. So, and then we had policy misalignments. Single spine was a major, misalignment. Because the economy was melting, we couldn't support our subsidy programs, and that also was a major misalignment. When you put all this together, the economy took a major hit. You couldn't be growing with these factors.
Okay.
And so from a very optimistic, we turned to a homegrown policy first to try and stabilize, to do corrections and stabilize, things, and then consolidate, and then do a turnaround. Now we say that we're in the turnaround era. And then whilst we were doing this, you also did some investments because we saw the potential in oil and gas, particularly Tenfield, and Sankofa. So one of the things that's going to happen tomorrow is the signing. I'm sure that your people will be there. The signing of the last security indemnity that would bring in the Sankofa, the FPSO, the third FPSO is being built. So the investments was taking place. So even though you were going through all this difficulty, you had to also keep your eye whilst you are doing the correction. We entered into an IMF program. So I hope that explains.
It really gives us a great context.
Why, the context, of the economy.
And I truly appreciate that. I'm sure our listeners do that as well. The question of double-digit deficit. I mean, even in the period where you had started, streamlining with your homegrown policies. For example, we had a double-digit deficit not only in 2012, but in 2013 and also in 2015. Why did we end up in a situation like that if indeed we had put in the prudent measures to ensure that we were not hemorrhaging as badly?
No, I think when you talk about the twin deficits, you are talking about first the fiscal deficit.
That's right.
That's the budget deficit. Let's try and simplify the budget. At the end of 2012 in particular, and then the current account, which is our ability to the difference between our ability to generate foreign exchange and then use our foreign exchange. That's the external side of the economy. The reasons are just what I have said. When your economy faces these big shocks, and industry is producing 5 hours instead of 8 hours, 4 hours instead of, they are not able to pay you the level of taxes.
That is true.
That will be required.
But in that period, we didn't
so,
see government, for example, we didn't see some kind of policy to mitigate the effect
that's the
of the. But we didn't see that affect the single spine salary structure.
It did. Let's just come to some numbers.
Okay.
We don't want to dominate with numbers. We were at a fiscal deficit of 11.5, almost 12%.
That's right.
Today, the fiscal deficit is at 5%. It's heading towards 5%. Our target at the end of this year is 5.1. At the end of last year, we hit 6.7. 6 points. Let me get it. 6.3. In fact, we were supposed to be doing 7.1. Originally 7.3, and then 7.1. So we overperformed, as far as that is concerned. So if you look at when the problem started, you can see that the deficit has been going down, and we can explain why bringing down the deficit is very important. When you talk about wages, the wages as a percentage of our tax revenue without arrears was 53.3%, very high. That is, the budget has wages or compensation, it has expenditure on goods and services, it has interest payments, and it has what you need to develop infrastructure. Even if you develop your infrastructure by loan, you have to pay back all those things. So when you are using 53% for only wages, it means that more than half of your own taxes that you are bringing is going into that. We should be around between 35 and 40%. So between the end of 2012 and now, at the end of our targets, it's around 40.6, but we brought it down to 43.7. Thanks to the whole forum, the post-whole forum in Takoradi, and policies such as determining the minimum wage and the base pay, before, so that you have a very fair idea of the cost, of wages before you do the budget. We used to have a lot of agitation long after the budget had been read. Then we conclude these things, and they cause a lot of disruption. For example, that China was going at a very, very fast pace. It has slowed.
That's true.
Over the last, for 5 years. We know what is happening in Brazil. There was even doubt whether the Rio Olympics, would materialize. I mean, luckily it has gone through. We know India, has recovered. I'm talking about this, I'm mentioning South Africa. We know the impact that power is having on South Africa. Nigeria, Angola. I'm mentioning this because it's important to also put sometimes what is happening domestically in the global context. And I mention these countries because these are the countries which were classified as the BRICS.
That's right.
The emerging countries with very powerful, with propelled global growth. So I think some of what is happening, when you look at these other countries, then you see what you can also explain partly what is happening, to us, domestically. But the issue is not to sit and bemoan and use it as an excuse. The issue often is leadership has to reorient itself. When you come under certain circumstances. As you said, the economy was growing very fast. Everybody was very hopeful. Then we had a domestic, I mentioned some subsidy, single spine, and various other policy misalignments coming in, the gas supply, shortage, coming in at the same time as you had the commodity shocks and things from outside. What you had to do was to do a plan. And that was a homegrown policy. By the time that we were losing, reserves, and your business news just, highlighted the governor talking about the essence, of the cocoa to the stability of the city. In fact, we were talking about GDP growth. So, and cocoa is very strong when it comes to, the agri sector. So again, these are somewhat together with what we are doing in oil and gas. So you have to get a plan to stabilize the economy, move it out of, the decline that it is going through. And as we are seeing now, you move into a turnaround. And then your investments, government as well as private sector facilitation, such as Tenfield, Sankofa. And it's not just that, but midstream, downstream, because we can talk about some of, our plans has to be put in place. The infrastructure fund, the sinking fund, the Exim Bank, the very things that His Excellency was talking about, which are in his vision for the country, the transformation. You have to. So we had a three position: securing, the economy, doing a turnaround, and entering a growth phase. And some of the numbers I was pointing in this context. For example, we had huge arrears of wages, about 3 billion. We have paid it down. We have seen, as a result of the backlog in education and health, some of it, emerging. But we also seen a lot of fraud. I'm referring to, your headline news item. For example, let me give you one quick example. When you give a financial clearance, for the recruitment of public servants. So I don't want to be specific, but let's say teachers, what we are seeing is that some of these financial clearance, which take effect from, say, January 2016, are backdated at the time of entry of the personnel records to, say, 2015. What it means is that you are going to be paying arrears, which you shouldn't be paying. And these are some of the validation exercises that, Honorable Kujetu Abrakwa was talking about in terms of the meeting.
That's right.
But, you have to do validation. We are bringing down the phenomenon of ghost names. We don't hear much about it. Crime then shifts to something else, and you have to always be, on track. So these are some of the things. And when it is important to position, I don't think we should put something like the themes, for example, in a manifesto. They are not something they are saying as promises and things that are. But for example, the things we are doing with GIFMIS, putting them all releases now, every release. When I talk about release, I mean the request for expenditure on electronic platform.
Okay.
Making sure that ministries, departments don't exceed their budget, so that we have overruns. These are all when you come to, say, theme 4. Transparent and accountable governance, because when you talk about governance, transparency, and accountability, you're talking about the budget, as well. And so you have to put these systems that check, good systems that check, and these are this is the context in which we must see what His Excellency said, that we are already implementing many of these things. Many of the things we are talking about are not mere promises. They are things which we have put. The fact that we say that we are going to move into an oil gas and then twin it with, let's say, salt. Your business use was talking about, the value chain in the economy. That is part of the midstream, downstream strategy for oil and gas.
Okay.
To link petroleum byproducts to, say, salt, to other, bitumen and others, fertilizer. And this is a sort of transformation.
And these transformations, the average Ghanaian today has a present need of some kind of reprieve in the economy. We're talking about turnarounds, but it is not something that's resounding with everybody. The man on the street doesn't really feel that things have let up a little bit. These are great ideas, but in the short, issues...
They are not just ideas. They are things.
These are policies that are worthy policies to follow. But will they fix the problems of today?
Yes,
People,
I think His Excellency and I heard other ministers come to your studio. For example, employment. You have to look at the strata of employment. You cannot do the infrastructure that we are doing. By the way, we are doing infrastructure at the same time as managing the debt, and that is a trick. How do you borrow for infrastructure development, and not overshoot your borrowing, but at the same time be very efficient and selective in the way you develop infrastructure. When you develop infrastructure, when you pay a contractor, he employs. Okay, you will not say, they employ all manner. So if you take every single school, you take every water project, you see whatever, these are some of the immediate things that are. So as you do this, you address employment. For example, when you reduce the budget deficit, right, it means that government does not borrow more. As government, disciplines itself and does not go into the market and swoop the credit that we were talking earlier on about the role of the banking sector and mobilize. If government goes in and
crowds out the private sector,
interest rates will continue to be high. Credit will not be available.
But
this is where we must see the essence. How, when you talk about how practical are the policies, I'm saying, look at it. When I say that the deficit is going down, businesses must see it that government is not competing unnecessarily. Government must mobilize resources. Government should not be there just borrowing and increasing. That way, how does it affect business? It affects business by the availability. The credit that government is not taking, the loans that government is not taking, will become available. When we, for example, borrow from outside, and we use it to replace domestic debt, I think this is very important. We are used to treasury bills. Everything we go for treasury bills. Treasury bills are just 3 months. If you go and borrow through treasury bills for a road project, you have not even finished the feasibility, and the 3 months is due for payment.
Yeah.
So when you want to borrow, you have to borrow long term for that road project, so that road project can contribute in terms of marketing, in terms of business output, and therefore increases in taxes to be able to pay back. So when we go and borrow and we bundle, let's say 1 billion Ghana cedis of treasury bills that will fall due, and we use external resources to refinance it, as we say, to pay in 13 years instead of every 90 days. It means that government won't come back to the market, the domestic market, at the end of 3 months. And that means that, money will become available for business. The money that government would have taken, domestic, will become available. Another quick example. If VRA is owing the banks and it's not paying, and you don't do anything about it, you come to non-performing loans. I heard your news item after the MPC talking about non-performing loans. So what have we done? We've taken the levies, bitter as it is, to pay 250 million Ghana cedis, to the banks. That injects liquidity. That reduces VRAs, arrears to the banks. And then we have restructured. It has enabled the banks to restructure the loan to be repaid over 3 to 5 years. That means that the phenomenon of non-performing loans is minimized, and that means the banks are able, to give more credit, not just to VRA, but to other businesses. But we are not going to let VRA off the hook. We are bringing the receivables which VRA was using and the savings that are being made to pay for the NGAS, what we are owing NGAS. That savings that we are making in order that, gas can flow. This is how the policy, I'm demonstrating how the policy affects business, households, because the ability of VRA to now go back to those banks and establish an LC makes a difference between when gas is cut and you have to switch quickly to light crude. VRA has to import the light crude. Without the ability of VRA to establish that light crude because it is owing many banks, it means that business is going to go down. And this is how, the policies. So the policies are not just, something, so I agree with you. We need to explain more how government policy affects business so that business affects households.
And I like the attempt at that. It's sound as far as the point you've made. But would you agree that the deficit, the double-digit deficit, which was largely attributed, and this was something that I think the IFS, SEPA, and ISE mentioned, that our expenditure in an election year, especially in 2012, was something that we had never seen in the Fourth Republic. Are we still not reeling from the effects of that overspend?
No, but that is the deficit that was around 12%. And I think that sometimes the commentary does not help. For example, I have heard well-informed people refer to events that happened in 2012. And yet still, we have, you know that, I have been quite, open doing PowerPoint presentation. And so when you are referring to a deficit of 12%, it is feeding the notion that Ghana, where are we today? We gave an update. We gave an update that said that as at the first half of 2016, in an election year, the deficits that we are talking about, it's not 12%. We are in an election year.
No.
We are around 5%. And I said at the end, we are around 3 points.
Similarly, in 2012, we probably hovered under 10%. We were in the single digits before the elections. But by the time we're done the elections, the numbers, you crunch the numbers, and it was about 10. So is there an assurance that we are not going to see what happened in 2012 again in 2016?
I think we are on course. It is not just a recent phenomenon. This is a phenomenon from 1992.
Something we know is not helpful.
And we track it ourselves. We did research. We went back to 1992 every single year. And I showed that graph in one. I don't have it here, but I showed that graph in one of my presentations. And it was a basis on which His Excellency, we did that work because His Excellency wanted to know what is the truth in this, going into the State of the Nation address. And in the State of the Nation address, he addressed it. And he said, he addressed it and he said I think I have the quote here, I'm not sure. But he said that it has become the bane for which Ghana is identified. And we have become infamous for it. And this is something we must put behind us. So I think we all need to make a concerted effort, because this is not an issue for any, it's not an issue, because every election year, and we have had different governments, every election year. Yes, hopefully we would put it, behind us, because it is part of a homegrown policy, and it is also in the IMF policy that we'll try and discipline ourselves as much as possible.
Will you call it a homegrown policy, for a pro-poor administration to almost burden the people with taxes and levies, especially when your tax net is a very small one? How are you going to expand the tax net to ensure that the levies and taxes do not, burden and kill the same people who have been paying over time?
I do understand, that politically, maybe it's good to place a charge, I'm only interested in increasing taxes, on the finance minister. But the concern is when, again, knowledgeable, informed people need to address, what have we been doing? Yes, we did impose some temporary taxes as part of the, correction that we had to do. Temporary import duties, and then also, the fiscal stabilization levy, which is not new. Then, there was a national stabilization and another. In all, this is between 1 and 2% of our total revenue. So I think let us look at it in terms of impact. 1 to 2% of the total revenue. It is not what is bringing us the major resource for restructuring. We are doing, but what are we doing in taxes? Right, Inshira? We have had a Customs Act, which was a 1983 Act. And we have just been making amendments upon amendments. What we did was to take that act to Parliament and say, just like the rebasing we're talking about, how can you run a 2016 economy with a 1983-1985 law? We took the VAT and the income tax, acts which were passed between 1998 and 2000 to Parliament. Again, just look at the number of years that these acts have been in existence. And all we've been doing is making incremental changes without a comprehensive review. We never used to have an excise act. The excise, when we talk about excise taxes, you have to go through the Customs Act, you have to go through the VAT Act, you have to go through various, to be able to see businesses were struggling. What we did was to, for the first time, give the nation, an excise act. Then we have revamped all the regulations. The economy is becoming complex. And even when you hear about Panama Papers, you can see how even the advanced countries, are going after a certain form of tax evasion and avoidance, which they call the BEPS, base erosion and profit shifting, from your economy. We are experiencing that because you have multinational corporations and whatever. What did we do? We put in a transfer pricing regulation, which many countries do. On the PFM side, the Loans Act is a 1970 act. How can you, long before Ghana went to the markets, long before, we introduced 3-year bonds, 5-year bonds domestically,
and
long
PFM
before
is public finance management.
The public finance management.
Yeah.
So, yes, if the charge is that there's something, wrong in bringing these laws to make it clearer and transparent to business, right? And it's been seen as something, which is negative. No, I don't see it that way at all. And I don't think a lot of businessmen see it that way. And therefore, we'll have to see, we do pay taxes. You pay taxes, right?
Yeah.
Joy FM pays taxes. And Joy FM withholds, taxes from your pay. It must be transparent. The regulations must be up to date and transparent. So these are other things that we have done. So our tax agenda is not just about, increasing taxes. It's about modernizing, the tax laws, the tax processes, just as we are doing with the PFM.
You've outlined a number of policies, one of which intrigues me, that there are plans to get the district assemblies and municipal assemblies to be able to now borrow off their own balance sheets, basically so that all of this debt burden doesn't sit on the government balance sheet. Looking at the current depth of this nation, the financial system that we find ourselves in, will this help? And how is that going to be achieved?
Well, let me explain. We have the District Assembly's Common Fund. The District Assembly's Common Fund is 7.5% of total revenue.
Okay.
Total revenue. And so if you take it that approximately our total revenue is around 18 billion, but maybe to simplify the calculation, and since we are hoping, let's say it's 20 billion, you are giving 7.5, 5%, 10% of, 20 billion is 10.
It's 1.5 billion.
Yes, yes.
The 7.5 makes 1.5 billion.
That's right. This is the money that is going to the district assemblies. If you go to the district assemblies, the District Assemblies Act, this money is also meant for infrastructure development, right? So what do? We take the money annually and we bring it in annually for infrastructure. Let's say an assembly wants to do a market. So you see that assembly and we go to our hometowns and you see a building, 5 years, it's under construction. There's another view of development that says escrow 15% of that, of that revenue, the District Assembly's Common Fund, escrow 15% or so of it, 20%, right? Use it to borrow domestically or internationally to come and finish the project quickly, not in 5 years, but finish it in, let's say, 6 months. Okay? Now you have the 4.5 years for the project to contribute to repay the loan.
Help me understand. So you take a 15% of the 7.5% that you are setting aside.
Yes.
From total revenue for the.
That's a vision. The vision is to put a percentage of that money that is meant for infrastructure anyway. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Into escrow.
You put it into escrow.
And then you sort of lock it away and borrow against it.
So when the law comes into effect, right? When the formula goes to Parliament, Parliament is going to say 15% should go into escrow to enable assemblies borrow for commercial projects, like markets and market stalls and others, and finish the projects more quickly from the loans, so that the projects will contribute towards repayment of the loan. It's the same philosophy under the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund, that we established, And Cocoa Board is moving in the same direction for infrastructure, development.
In mentioning Cocoa Board, it quite intrigues me also that Cocoa Board has just, gone out and borrowed money at about, 2% or so?
Less than 2%.
Less than 2%, okay. But how is it that there's a small amount, though, but how is it that the state has to borrow at 10% when LIBOR itself is less than 1%?
No, what you have to ask is, how many institutions even globally are borrowing at 2%? If LIBOR may be low, the minimum you can borrow is LIBOR plus 4.5% for many institutions.
Okay.
In fact, many developing countries borrow at LIBOR plus 6%, 8%. Because you are talking about Europe, where you have sub-zero rates now.
That's right.
It's not the same as a developing country. So for Cocoa Board to borrow at LIBOR plus, a ratio, a margin that is less than 2%, is phenomenal. But I think what is the lesson that we can learn from that? Cocoa Board has been doing this since 1994. And Cocoa Board, has consistently, over the last 10 or so years, been borrowing at these margins, whether LIBOR is high or low. What is the secret? And what can we learn? Escrow again. What does Cocoa Board do? The tradition is that when Cocoa Board goes to borrow and the cocoa is sold, is forex. So Cocoa Board first payment out of the proceeds is to repay the loan. And so they have an escrow account in I think in Germany and in London, where immediately they sell the cocoa, they agree terms and they transfer, the repayment. What does it mean? No default. Since 1994, not a single default. Even when cocoa, output is low, prices are low, Cocoa Board has never defaulted. Okay? This is how escrows work. And that is why we are introducing, airport company has started an escrow from the airport tax to give confidence to banks that there's a stream of income, which I can use for commercial development. And the Ministry of Finance is a signatory to that account to make sure that that account will not be used for any other purpose. I can say for sure that much of the development, included Terminal 3, is based on this principle. Ports and Harbours Authority has adopted that. Metromass is adopting that principle. The difficulty in our SOE is not being able to borrow, and by the way, VRA follows that same principle, is that they do not give confidence to banks that when they borrow, they can pay back. And therefore, that's how come the state has to either borrow for them or the state has to issue the sovereign guarantee.
Isn't that a chicken and egg situation, especially that the state itself is one of the biggest entities
I'll address that.
VRA?
Let's address the two issues, because we want to come to a vision. You're talking about VRA, yes. It came out of subsidies. Remember, we are correcting the subsidies as part of what we're talking about. So it's not just about, that's how come the banks are able, together with the levy. But let me just go to the issue of the escrow, which is a very interesting concept. So if you do escrows, if you take a portion of DACF, And Ghana Water has just started an escrow, from its revenues. And the banks know that there's a dedicated source for repayment, both domestic and foreign banks. In fact, this is also the principle underlying the EXIM. We are going to be working with, Chamber of Commerce, AGI, for those businesses that export. Right? Remember, it is not Cocoa Board that's doing the export, but it is what? Private businesses. And the private businesses, through their banks, can appoint a correspondent banks, let's say in Germany, so that when the private individual exports, right, and earns the forex, it will pay the money to a correspondent bank, and the money will be paid back here. Now, the EXIM Bank is going to be the one that's going to be, helping to do this, particularly for the private sector. But SOEs and others, can also join. Now, it means that if you're an exporter and you are exporting to China, you are going to earn renminbi, which is now convertible. If you export to Germany, you are going to earn euro and whatever. You can, through the EXIM Bank, take a loan from the EXIM Bank and repay in forex. What does that mean? Like Cocoa Board, EXIM Bank will be able to borrow at the low interest rates overseas and channel it to, to our businessmen, right? This is another way of bringing in international capital. We don't have a structure for tapping international capital. Cocoa Board has a structure for tapping international capital. If we work through the EXIM Bank, with the AGI and with Chamber of Commerce, so that those who are exporting, that's how China and others started their export-led economies.
Why has it taken us since 1994 when we realized that this Cocoa Board approach was working? Why have we not tried to use it?
Well, again, that is our vision. And this is the things which the brainstorming sessions that we normally have. But what we may not know.
But 94 to 2016 is a long time.
We did have the institutions. Bank of Ghana established an EXIM export credit, company. Bank of Ghana and a number of banks established the EXIM guarantee. Government itself established the EDIF. So these have been operating in different independently. So you had the export credits company, you had the EXIM guarantee, you had EDIF. They were doing the same thing, but they were doing it independently, and they couldn't bring the mass, to do it. So what the EXIM Bank is doing actually is to bring all of these institutions together to be able to do it, much better. And that is the process that is ongoing. The board has been appointed. Very soon there will be recruitment for every insurer. As we speak, Ghana has become a target. Ghana and many African countries. We were talking about new colonialism, by the way. Ghana and African countries have become a target for EXIM banks. From US EXIM, China EXIM, Turkish EXIM, you name them. India EXIM, so many EXIM banks, Korea EXIM. What are they doing? EXIM means export-import, right? They are targeting you, they are exporting. They are giving you loan. But when they give you the loan, you must use products from their country. So why can't we also, look at what they are doing? Many of these, where you were talking about Korea in the morning, earlier in the morning, having a per capita which was lower than, the Ghana. These are some of the initiatives. Korea EXIM was instrumental in helping, the Korean economy look outward. So we can, use, the EXIM, to boost non-traditional exports. We have had that policy. Okay. What we are doing is to put a guarantee, a guarantee scheme, a credit scheme, and a promotion scheme. Okay. And then standards are also important, because to export to the EU, you need to meet standards. So we're going to have Drugs, Food and Drugs Authority and Standards Authority add to their mandate. They already have it, but enhance that mandate to help exporters. And this is what, we try. These are all in the vision. That's why Excellency was talking, so passionately about the initiatives from infrastructure fund to EXIM and to other.
Mr. Tekwe, for the average Joe like me, when I look back at the fact that under this administration, the price of petrol. A gallon has gone from 3 cedis to 16 cedis. I found out just a few weeks ago, and thanks to my wife, she doesn't really tell me how much.
I thought the prices were going down.
Really? 7
Yes, because
cedis. Bread, which we used to buy for 2 cedis, is now 7 cedis.
I think we should get to the facts. I don't think that we are selling petrol at the same price when crude oil was $115. That was within this administration.
I'm just giving you.
I said we should also get the numbers right, because it will go down there. Right. I don't have the numbers, but I'm saying that we are definitely not selling petrol. Remember that crude oil price hit 115, and that is the problem with the subsidies that we're talking about.
The quantum of reduction that we have seen compared to the levels of increase that we had over the period under this administration, petrol prices have more than doubled. And that has a net effect on every Ghanaian. Goods in transit and all of those things become expensive. Let me just run you through these.
Let's settle on this.
Milk, for example, has gone up. A tin of milk from 1 cedi is now 3 cedis. I mean, you can't buy a ball of kenkey for 50 pesos anymore. These are the realities on the ground. How does that convince me, the average Joe who has to go through these things, that indeed we are at a turnaround point in this this economy?
Ishira, I think we said a lot already, and sometimes they help to explain, but we tend to also repeat. I said this was economy. We suffered shocks. 2.5 years. It's never happened in the. We did have in the past. Water level, when we were basically hydro, water levels are Kosombo. Maximum 6 months you are back into the rainy season. 3 months you are back in the rainy season. It may be low, but it's not. It's not like 2.5 years when you have switched to thermal disruption. We spoke about, we just spoke about commodity price falls. We are not excusing it away, but we are saying that was the reality in the economy. And I think I went through and I gave you the corrections and the measures that we are doing. When an economy goes through these shocks, you do have. For example, if subsidies have become such a big issue, you're either going to borrow to pay subsidy. You know that it's not sustainable, just as our debt levels. And therefore, as you remove some of the subsidy, not every year you implement cross subsidy, you are going to, because you were pushing down the price in the past, it also means that you were keeping inflation low. So when you remove the subsidy, inflation, that's why among our indices, inflation is the one that has taken a long time to start seeing a decline. Because when you remove subsidies from utilities and from, which is not targeted. It goes to people, riding V8s and other, that's not the target for the subsidy. The target for the subsidy is a cross subsidy at the low level. It has a consequence. And what we are telling, people is that we are seeing the transformation, the growth would go. By the way, every economy, even mighty US, does not have a constant value of the currency.
Okay, well, that's a fair point to make.
Yes,
but we're all speaking from our reality.
No, but that is
would you agree would you agree with subsections of our society, and especially the opposition, saying that the economy is broke? Would you agree?
The economy is not broke. It's not broke. We are even in a phenomenon. We are even in an era where Bank of Ghana is not financing government.
You can explain to us what this phenomenal growth you just started mentioning is all about. It would be nice for us to understand that when we come back from this.
No, you spoke about messages. Broke. The economy is broke.
You say it's not broke.
No, and I'm saying that we are even, for the first time in the history of the country,
not going to the Bank of Ghana.
We are not going to the Bank of Ghana. How is government financing? How do you say a government is broke when it's not going to Bank of Ghana for 10%?
For the money. No, but you're going to the open market, you're issuing bonds.
No, but we are also looking at the tax level. We are mobilizing. GRA is doing significant, work. GRA has moved from having one tax office that attends to everybody to having a large taxpayer office, because large taxpayers have more complex issues than small taxpayers. Okay. So you have small taxpayers who are addressing the needs of small taxpayers, implementing, and you have medium taxpayer offices. So we are also doing significant, revenue mobilization. We are also doing a lot of PFM reforms. Some of your guys were there yesterday when we did the presentation. So I think that we're doing quite a number of, reforms.